Hello, my name is Elliot Gaskins, the head of Director of Development Operations here at the Aspen Institute, and I want to welcome you. I appreciate everybody realizing the time. We had to cancel last time because of the infamous Snowmageddon, so I'm glad everybody can make it out and saw this time of the event. I want to introduce you to Ashley Merryman, who this is her first time here at the Aspen Institute. Ashley has written for Newsweek, Time, The Washington Post, and many other kind of extraordinary publications. But it's really NurtureShock that's really has been an extraordinary piece of work. It's been recognized in almost 30 best of lists. It's been a bestseller, New York Times bestseller. Uh, Amazon has been one of the top sellers for over a year. It's just been an extraordinary book. And one of the funny stories about the book is that Ashley and Poe Bronson, the co-author, did a piece for New York Magazine. It was the most email piece in the history of New York Magazine until they posted some racy photos of Lindsay Lohan, and then that became the most. I don't know if I want to laugh or cry because of that, but in any case, this book is extraordinary in that it's not only been recognized by traditional media and online media, but the scientific community have really found value in this book. So really, without further ado, I want to bring Ashley up, and I want to remind you that after this, Ashley will be signing books. We'll do a Q&A, and then we'll be signing books, and feel free to meet Ashley. So, please.
Thank you all for coming. I don't think this is Rainmageddon, so I'm glad to see you. But I'm from California. Water from the sky is a traumatic event anyway. Thank you very much for the Aspen Institute, especially Elliot, who's been so helpful in the scheduling and the rescheduling. And it's really made me look forward to this event and be really excited about this opportunity to talk to you about something that I think we all care about profoundly, which is our kids. It doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on. It doesn't matter what religious or spiritual tradition, or if you don't have a religious or spiritual tradition, we all care about kids. And we want to see what we can do that's the best for them. And it was interesting. I was at a conference of teachers a couple weeks ago in New York, and the keynote speakers were there. And they were all saying, oh, we've got to motivate kids to stay in school. And then the next keynote speaker or the workshop all said, oh, we've got to motivate kids to stay in school. We can't let them drop out. We've got to motivate kids to go to college. We've got to motivate kids to study science and STEM programs so that we can, be number one again in the world. And I was like, wow, that's all really great. And after about 2 days of this, it was time for my session, and I said, does anybody actually know how to motivate kids? Regardless the context? Maybe we need to step back for a moment and think about, how do we motivate? What are we doing that motivates, and what are we doing that inadvertently, with the best of intentions, may actually be killing kids' motivation? Those things are out there. So I want to talk today about what is motivation, how does it apply in kids' learning and cognitive and psychological development. Then I want to talk about some of those things we do that do encourage and inadvertently kill motivation along the way. Some of them are going to be like, what? How's that even something to do with motivation? But we need to keep coming back and saying, this does relate. It's always about motivation. And if we forget that, we can have the coolest new computer in class. We can have, the new toy or the new funding or the new teacher. But if we miss that fundamental idea about motivation, I don't think we can succeed. And we need to succeed. Our kids' futures are at stake. And if our kids' futures are at stake, as we all policy wonks know, that means our futures are at stake too. So, little quick motivation 101. There's two kinds of motivation, right? There's intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation I think of as just doing something for the sheer love of it. That's it. I don't care if it's debating someone in politics or knitting or skiing or singing at church. I don't care what it is. It's just that thing that you just love to do. Just the thought of it just lights up your face. Extrinsic motivation is everything else. Everything else. Payment for a job, certificate for a job well done, applause. Hopefully you guys will be laughing. I love laughing, but it's an extrinsic motivation. Applause, like I said, doesn't have to necessarily be out loud. Approval from your peers counts. Status, acclaim, anything that is about what you love to do is extrinsic motivation. Well, why do we care? You know, don't both of them get the job done? We do care. We care a lot. Because extrinsic motivation is inherently temporary. Think about your last Christmas bonus. Made you happy. You loved it. Do you remember it now? Does it motivate you to go to work now? No. I've had lots of jobs that I loved the first week, but after that I kept coming for the salary. You know, once the politics and the bureaucracy and the reality of what this was going to be didn't seem so inspiring all the time, I kept going for the salary. If the salary stopped, I would have stopped going. Right? Some of you might like my jacket. I like my jacket. And if you say, oh, that's a pretty jacket, thank you so much. Extrinsic motivation, praise for me to go buy another jacket. Because it's only going to last for as long as I wear this. In academics, we find that extrinsic motivation either has no correlation to academic achievement or there's a negative result. Intrinsic motivation has a consistent, not perfect relationship, but it's certainly there. For the stats fiends in the room, it's about a 0.3 or a 0.4. And there's a lot of things that we do that are way worse than a 0.3 or 0.4. So it's a strong motivation. But I think to me what's becoming the most interesting about motivation is research that neurologists are doing, researchers like Sylvia Bungay out of the University of California, Berkeley. She's explained to us that unlike most chemicals in the brain, the neurotransmitters that sort of fire the synapses, motivation results in a creation of dopamine in the brain. And the dopamine doesn't just go synapse to synapse, it's actually sort of spritzed across large swaths of the brain, especially the reward center, the ventral striatum, but it goes everywhere. And once the dopamine hits the brain's activated. It becomes focused and attention, and it has more attention. It's paying attention. If this all seems fuzzy, think about a kid opening a Christmas present, right? Or their favorite cookie or whatever. There's nothing else going on in the world except for that thing right there. Well, that's what's happening on a neurological level when dopamine is going. When dopamine fires, you learn more quickly, and what you learn holds on longer. Now, I thought this was really fascinating because I said, well, wait, Sylvia. I'm sure some other neurologist explained to me that rewards are manifested in the brain as dopamine. She said, yes, that's true. Reward center is activated with dopamine. Like, but you just said motivation gets dopamine. I thought motivation was the engine to get to a goal. I'm motivated to come here today. I'm motivated to give you guys a talk. I'm motivated to work hard and go to college. I'm motivated to succeed in my relationships. Don't I get dopamine when I'm successful? Yes. But you're saying I get it along the way. Yes. It turns out that on a neurological level, dopamine, motivation, is a reward. It's not getting there, it's the process of getting there that becomes rewarding. That's why when you're lucky enough to find that job that you love, or that thing that you love, just the idea of doing it, just starting doing that new project is as exciting as finishing it. Finishing it will be a letdown because that motivation triggered dopamine goes away. Now, that brings me to the work of Roy Baumeister. Roy Baumeister is a researcher at Florida State, and his life's work was the study of self-esteem. He believed, as many, many psychologists and educators and caregivers, myself included, that if you give kids self-esteem, if you boost not just kids, but anyone in an underserved community, anyone who's not living up to their potential, if you tell them what their potential is, how fantastic they are, they will rise to the occasion because they know they can do it, right? If you know you can do it, it's not going to be traumatic to try. You know you can do it. And that's research that has really kicked off. It started with a psychologist from Canada, I know Brandon, but in 1984, the state of California created a state task force to boost self-esteem. How are we going to boost it? And once they did that, it just sort of became this snowball national and is actually becoming an international movement. So Roy Baumeister was asked by the Association for Psychological Science to do a meta-analysis of self-esteem literature. Prove once and for all how important self-esteem can be. And this being Roy's life's work, he was thrilled to do it. So we got together a team of scholars, and they pulled together every self-esteem study that had been done since 1970 to 2000. Over 15,000 studies. It's the most studied phenomenon in all of psychology. And then they started looking at it, and they found out, wow, they were right all along. High self-esteem did actually predict high achievement in school and in life. It predicted better relationship quality. It predicted lower alcohol use, better leaders. But then they started reading the studies, not just the abstracts, and they realized there was a problem. And they started throwing out the studies, one by one, that didn't meet the standards they had set in terms of what was good science. 10 went away, 20 went away, 1,000 went away, 10,000 went away. Of the over 15,000 they started out with, only 200 were left that they considered to be good science. What was wrong with all of those other studies? They were self-reports. They asked people with high self-esteem, can you tell me about yourself? Not surprisingly, people with high self-esteem think they're awesome. And people with low self-esteem, to use a technical term, think they suck. But when you asked a neutral third party, when you asked that college student's roommate or that employer of that fabulous manager, or you asked the romantic partner, or you got their GPAs, you found a completely different story. In fact, if any of you were actually looking for a new friend or a roommate, I recommend someone with low self-esteem, because they don't think you like them and they really want to change that, and they'll do anything for you. People with high self-esteem think you're along for the ride. It turns out there was no correlation between high self-esteem and school achievement, or pretty much any of the other thing I mentioned. High self-esteem people do a little more going for them in leadership skills because they think you will follow them, so they kind of have that attitude. But on the whole, nope. But it was actually one of Roy's individual studies, not just one of the analysis, but some of his individual work that I found was the most amazing. One of my favorites was that a college professor sent out emails to an introductory psych class to the students who were getting C's or lower. And the email read something like this. I just want to let you know you're doing really poorly in my class, but I think you're a really good person and I like you anyway. People who got that email, their grades dropped more. Why? Well, you remember college, you remember school. What did you want to do? Impress the professor with your mastery of the subject. If your professor said, notwithstanding the fact that you have no mastery of the subject, I think you're fabulous, done. When you know you're awesome, there's no need to improve. There's no motivation. In fact, the only thing that when you're sure of how spectacular you are is that if you try something new, you might not be great at it. And then what? And that brings me to the research about Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck was at Columbia. She's now at Stanford. And she does more experimental work. And she focuses specifically on kids. And she's found that a single line of praise can change a kid's willingness to learn, a willingness to experiment and try new things, and basically rattle or ensure their own perspective. She did this one thing with fifth graders where she had them all come in and randomly assigned them at the start and said at the finish, when they've done this IQ puzzle, sort of like, an analogy, pick which puzzle is going to be the next. And she told half of them, "Oh, honey, you did really well. You must be really smart." And she told the other half, "Oh, honey, you did really well. You must have worked hard." Now, she expected some effect. Really wasn't sure if there'd be any. It's one sentence, divide randomly. So she gave them another round of puzzles. And she said, "You can pick this one or that one. This one's really hard, but you're going to learn from it. This one's really easy. It's way easier than the one you just did. Which one do you want to do?" The majority of the kids praised for smarts picked the easy task. 90% of the kids praised for effort choose the more difficult task. Then she gave them another puzzle round. And in that puzzle round, she said, "Here you go." Didn't tell them that it was a puzzle designed for 7th graders, not 5th graders. It was designed for them to fail, and fail they did. In fact, they collapsed before her eyes. The kids who'd been praised for smarts literally started in seconds shaking visibly. They started pulling their hair, flop sweat, crumbling. She was terrified. She'd not expected this to happen. The kids praised for effort were bombing, but they actually enjoyed the experience. Really. They were actually telling her, "Wow, this is my favorite yet." And then they did one more round of tests. Now, these were the same level of difficulty as the very first ones. We would expect everyone to improve, right? There's a practice effect. They've all done it 3 times already. But the kids who were praised for intelligence, on average, their scores were 20% lower than they were when they began. The kids praised for effort, their on average scores had raised 30%. To me, the lesson of Carol and the lesson of Roy's work is the same, which is when you're told you're innately awesome, you don't need to try the hard thing. You don't need to learn. What you need to do is protect that identity. And that's what Carol's actually found in subsequent research. She's replicated in different versions this from preschool all the way through Ivy League med school. And she's found that kids who are praised tell her that they're more likely to cheat the next time. Why? Because if I'm smart and I do it wrong, I might not be smart anymore. I'd rather steal the answer from the guy next to me and say, "Well, I could have done it right if I had tried. But, I've got other things going on. He's the dumb one." We find that overpraised kids in school don't answer questions. They ask questions back. "What's 2 plus 2, class?" 4? If she was wrong, she's not wrong because she didn't actually answer the question, did she? She ended up overpraised kids in college can't make a decision on a college major because they're terrified that a year or 2 down in their studies, they're going to realize that they're not actually good at what they said was their life's work. And then what? Now, some of this research has gotten a lot of attention since we first wrote about it for New York. But it's interesting, there was this other study that was sort of tucked in the middle that most people didn't notice. And that was actually the newer work that Carol had done. And Carol's like, what I've really learned from all this is it's about mindset. Am I in control of my destiny? Is my intelligence, my knowledge, my achievement up to me? Or is it something that fate or genes or whatever got for me? The kids who were praised for being smart had that idea that smarts is what they had. But the kids praised for effort were told it's not about smarts, it's about your working hard. So Carol actually had another grad student, Lisa Blackwell, and she went into life sciences, which is a school in Harlem, mostly known for its poor kids and poorer test scores. And they pulled some of the kids out for a study skills session. But there was 2 of them, and one of them, they had basically 20 minutes, a 4-page version of neurology. And they explained to kids how brains work. And basically the lesson was, your brain is a muscle. And if you work your brain out, it's just like working out your bicep. Some of the kids were so stunned by this, they actually said, you mean it's up to me if I'm dumb? Now, it was a secret, because this is a randomized experiment, for the teachers, which category these kids were in. But suddenly, some of the teachers, after a couple of weeks, started going, my kid's in that weird section, aren't they? What did you do? No? Why? My kids are paying attention in class. They've never done that before. The kid who said, is it up to me to be dumb, was a C- student, and the next paper he turned in was a B+. But there was this little secret. We didn't actually know if that was true. We didn't actually know if it was up to you. We know that brain development occurs over time. We know that 1 out of 3 of us has an IQ shift of at least 15 points. 2 out of 3 of us. 1 out of the 3 of us has an IQ shift of up to 30 points, which is the difference between being average and being in the 98th percentile. But we didn't really know if actually this whole working it out brain thing actually was true. So that brings me back to Sylvia Bungay. Sylvia sort of wanted to replicate Carol's database. And what she did is she went to Berkeley in a underprivileged group and got 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders. And they went to a program after school for an hour and a half, twice a week for 8 weeks. And they did some activities. They tested their reasoning ability before and after. Their reasoning ability in 8 weeks went up 32%. In IQ points, that's an increase by 13 points. Now, well, what does that mean? Well, education actually increases your brain. It increases your IQ. The average kid's IQ over the course of an entire school year will go up 12 points. Sylvia got them to go up 13 points in 8 weeks. Wow, funding. Right? Don't we all want to know how to do it? And granted, she was working with kids whose average IQ to begin with was a 90, so we don't know what this would do for your kids who might already be at ceiling. But wow, it's pretty tempting, right? We're all going to say, ooh, there's a study. Well, Sylvia would love to have you guys contact her if anyone knows any grantors, because she's now replicating the experiment, but now she's going to do fMRI scans. She's now actually going to see if there's actually structural difference in the brain. But what I could tell you, in the meantime, is what she was using. She used a game I bet every one of you in this room has played. Perfection. Remember when you put the square in, it pops up? They played card games Spoon and Spit. There's another card game called Blink. They used Quirkle, which is sort of a graphics version of Scrabble. They played games. That was it. But they were games that were chosen for either reasoning ability, figuring out which one or the other, or for brain speed processing. That's what perfection was actually for. And it turned out you could actually increase how fast kids' brains functioned just as much as you could also change their reasoning. Changing reasoning didn't increase speed, and the speed games didn't increase the reasoning. So we're still sort of working on brain cross-training. But you can do this. You can change a kid's brain. But what was really important about Sylvia's work? It was fun. It was dopamine all over the place. And the kids were not bored with these games week after week because they only got to play one game 15 minutes at a time, and then they had to switch to something else. So they were constantly going back and forth and back and forth. More motivation, more dopamine. It's important. When we hear about constant rewards and constant praise for kids, well, Robert Cloninger, a researcher out of St. Louis, has been doing brain scans, and he's finding that that old cliche, praise junkie, may actually not just be a cliche. Because as I said, extrinsic rewards, including praise, mean you get dopamine. It's fine to get praise constantly. Dopamine constantly. It works. It's when you experience failure and the dopamine stops. Now what? In Carol Dweck's experiments, the kids who'd been praised for effort, were doing okay, but the kids who were praised for smarts, the dopamine was gone and they couldn't come back from failure because they hadn't learned any strategies that said they were going to keep going. Cloninger has found that what we really want is persistence. Persistence is the trait where you don't give up, right? You can have a disaster, but tomorrow will be better. Or next week will be better. I've interviewed Wall Street tycoons, White House chief of staff, Nobel Prize laureates, and every one of them told me, well, I'm really not that smart. Okay, well, the Nobel laureate thought he was kind of smart. But most of them have said, no, I'm really not smart. I got lots of people who work for me who are way smarter than me. I know lots of people who are way smarter than me. But I work those other people into the ground. And they weren't kidding. It was about effort. It was about that idea that if I put more in, even if there's a failure, I can recover and I can learn from it. And that was the other thing all of those tycoons told me. Yeah, sure, made a gajillion dollars off the .com that went well. Didn't learn a thing. I learned from the spectacular failure. And it's interesting, the sort of constant reaffirming and constant everything's great, that message that we tell kids has a couple messages that we don't hear, but they do. Oh, honey, okay, you're going to make that soccer goal next time. Don't worry about it. Totally said that one. What I didn't realize is that the message I'm sending is, failure is so terrible we dare not speak of it. We must concentrate on your future success, which is guaranteed, even though it ain't. What we want to teach kids is failure is an opportunity to learn. It's not a time to say, oh, honey, I failed too, because then it's about me, not you. It's about saying, what did you learn from this? Now, I have to tell you, when I read all this research, I've been tutoring kids in inner city Los Angeles for a decade. And I was really upset because I was totally in the rah-rah self-esteem boosting moment. And I was like, wow, I messed up hundreds of kids. That was a really happy day. But I also, and maybe this has some resonance in this room, learned more about myself. Because I have to admit something. I am not good at things I am not good at. I am going to be spectacular. Does that mean I'm spectacular at everything? No. It means the things that I don't know I'm good at, or the things I know I'm bad at, are not a part of my world. I want to do the sure thing. I want to do the thing I know I'm good at. Because, baby, that praise keeps coming. And that's what I want. So really want us to think about that. Some of you may have seen, I think you guys got out, George Will wrote a piece about our book a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how he picked up on one line in our book about a Massachusetts school district that was having kids jump rope without rope, lest they trip and feel badly about themselves. And I had a bunch of reporters start emailing me, what's the school district? Where's the school? You can tell they totally wanted to take pictures of these poor little kids going like this. That's not the only one, kids. There are school districts in Virginia that have the same approach. And I'm not about pointing fingers. I'm not going to tell you who they are, so don't ask. Because they're motivated by the best of intentions. But the best of intentions was hearing one piece of the story and then running with it. And never looking to see, well, has anybody else replicated this data? Has anybody actually confirmed in a different, does this work cross-culturally? Does this work neurologically? Nope. That is one of the things that, when we first started writing this book, I was at this conference. And someone was presenting new research, and somebody got up. It was a packed house. Right? This was a packed house. There were 500 people. Every major scientist in child development in the country, maybe the world, was in this room. And the guy presented new research, and everybody immediately stood up and said, well, how are you going to tell this to the policy people? He said, not. They were all like, what? They started yelling at him. How could this would change lives? He said, I know. But we all know what happened to school class sizes. And everybody in the room went, oh. Except for me, I had no idea what he was talking about. I knew there were studies that I hadn't read that said small school class sizes are good. But I couldn't figure out what he's talking about. So I did some research. And what I realized is that in 2 or 3 studies that came out about school class size, a bandwagon, another snowball, bigger than Snowmageddon, people wanted to implement this because we all care about our kids so much. Well, to implement small school class size, schools hired inexperienced teachers. They used temporary trailers that didn't have enough heat or air conditioning, or they tried to build classes, but that would take a while because the schools weren't built for such small classes. Of course, the budgets were stretched because now they had more teachers and more buildings. And since the budgets were so stretched, they didn't have enough money for school supplies. And it turned out that poorly ventilated, poorly constructed schools with lack of supplies and inexperienced school teachers cancel out any possible benefit you would have from small class size. Oops. And I want to take this one more twist. Researchers from the University of Michigan sort of rocked my world a couple weeks ago because they wrote a paper about the N effect, published in Psychological Science. And in the N effect, they looked at on a state basis, actually per site, of SAT test-taking venues. And they found that there was a relationship between how many kids went to one particular site to take their test and their score. The more kids at the site, the lower the score. The lower the score. That's kind of terrifying. And what they realized is competition is personal. They did an experiment where they had a trivia question for college students. We always experiment with college students because we can use it for class credit. So they had an experiment for college students, and they said, here's a really easy trivia question. You know all of the answers because they're just campus trivia. The fastest one of you to finish it gets $25. And there's only 9 of you competing, so the fastest of you, go. I said, hey, easy campus trivia. 100 of you doing it all together. Fastest wins. Go. The people who only competed against 9 non-existent people were significantly faster than those who were competing against 99 others. Competition is personal. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And he's like, yeah, it really makes you think about school class size, doesn't it? I said, what? He's like, well, all of the buzzwords about school class size have been that smaller classes mean more increased teacher-student interaction. What if the reason small class sizes work is because it's increased peer interaction? What if analysis based on school testing says, oh, small classes are better, and teachers who teach at them are better, but it's really peer interaction? Oops. I talked about that at the conference of teachers, and they actually started yelling. It was kind of ugly. But you can see that you just take one study or one piece out of context and you lose the thread. Competition, yes, it's an external motivation. I'm not saying encourage it, but it is a real motivating factor that changes kids' accomplishments. It changes how they learn on a long-term basis, and it changes how they are in the moment. Now, for those of you who are ready to move to Iowa, you don't need to. There's an antidote to the N effect, and that's thinking before you start, I am competing against one person, myself. And I am the only person who matters. And then the N effect seems to disappear. Thank goodness. So, other things that we're doing to kill motivation? Sleep. Our kids need sleep. I'm not kidding. You're all going to start yawning now, by the way, because you need sleep too. But kids on average get 1 hour of sleep less than they did 30 years ago. Even kindergartners get a half an hour less. Now, we're all tired. We're all busy. So, well, fine. They're all busy and tired with us, right? We're all yawning. I'm going to yawn. I'm jet lagged. Well, that was all fine until we understood the cost. Kids, preschoolers who fall below 10 hours of sleep a night increase their likelihood of becoming obese by 300%. For adolescents, it's a dose-response relationship. For every hour of sleep they're supposed to be getting regularly, their likelihood of becoming obese increases 80% per hour. On a neurological level, adolescence continues till you're 21 or 25. Only 5% of American high school students get 8 hours of sleep. They're supposed to be getting 9.25 hours of sleep. Fred Danner, a researcher in Kentucky, has found that if you drop below 8 hours of sleep as a teenager, your likelihood of clinical level depression doubles. Now, this is not an isolated study. We found a relationship between sleep shortening and obesity in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Portugal, Brazil, Shanghai, China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Tunisia. It's not about diet. It's not about family habits of co-sleeping. Oh, did I mention Japan? Japan too. I'm thrilled that the White House is taking on childhood obesity, but gosh, I'd love to see one more bullet on that webpage about sleep. Because obesity is a complex, multi-layered problem. But, kids were watching a lot of TV. Thin kids watch TV too. On average, kids watch 3.3 hours of TV a day. So much for the argument everyone's overscheduled. And it turns out that when you're a sleep-deprived brain learns less, and it learns selectively. Matt Walker, another brain researcher at UC Berkeley, has had sleep-deprived students come into the lab before the sleep deprivation. He says, here's a list. Look at these words. Don't go to bed for 36 hours, come back. They come back. Here's a list. Which of these words did you see before? Well, it turns out that sleep shortening hits the hippocampus harder than it does the amygdala. The hippocampus is the part of the brain that's responsible for declarative memory and more rational thinking. And the amygdala is the emotion center of the brain, and it's really strongly related to danger experiences, fight or flight. So the kids remembered 81% of the words like cancer, and they only remembered 31% of the words like basket or sunshine. Kids who are sleep deprived literally experience the world as a more hostile, difficult, negative place. And they literally, physically cannot remember neutral and positive experiences and neutral and positive facts. Are we all yawning yet? I'm yawning. Sleep deprived means less motivation. Your brain's too tired to work. You're emotionally drained. You're psychologically drained. On average, A students get 15 minutes of sleep more a night than B students, who get 15 minutes of night more than C. On the way. 15 minutes is all it might take. Fairfax County just had a recent discussion on whether or not they should change school start times, and they knew some of the science, and they said no. Friends of mine who teach at a magnet school in San Diego have a bell time of 7:05. It's a commuter magnet school. There are kids on the bus for an hour and a half. They were going to change school start times 15 whole minutes. Ha! Not even worth it, right? Well, 15 minutes, the difference between an A and a B, according to Brown University. Did it pass? Nope. Mark Mahalwell, the researcher who participates in these debates all the time, says no one has ever come up to him and said, well, you know, kids just learn more at 7. Nope. We all may think school is so important and education is so important, but when it came to school scheduling, it was teacher convenience. They like being done early so they can go to the doctor's appointment. Coaches didn't want practice to be late. School superintendents were worried about bus costs because it's cheaper to have kids going really early in the morning and doing 2 shifts instead of 1. Education's really all that important, huh? Sometimes there are simple things we can do. It doesn't take billions of dollars in federal and state laws. Sometimes we can just say, kid, go to bed. Or we can say, instead of, wow, you're so smart, kid, you worked really hard. Or if you didn't, honey, I don't really think you worked very hard on that. Did it make a difference? There's other avenues, though, that we also need to consider in motivation in school and achievement. Those are social, right? We do live in a social world. That extrinsic motivation is going to come. Where? Peers. The average middle schooler has 299 peer interactions a day. We wonder, why does it take so long for kids to grow up these days? Not realizing that we've let them grow up and socialize themselves. Because kids are with their peers more than anybody else. The only thing that they do almost near as much as that is sleep, but they're not getting enough of that, as we know. You know, there's all this buzz about the mean girls, right? Mean girls. Well, it turns out that for every one mean thing that mean girl does who's popular, she actually does 2 nice things. That's why she's popular. If she was really as mean as we have it crack her up to be, nobody would like her. But it's the popular girl who knows how to say, nice dress, and have everyone go, hee. And then you wearing the same dress, nice dress, honey. And everyone goes, right. It's the popular girl who knows that you can slam one person because she's just sort of awkward, nobody really cares. But you can't slam that other girl wearing the same exact dress because her parents just got divorced. And if you did, that'd be really cold. It's the popular girl who knows how to navigate both. It's not that she wants to be nice or she wants to be mean. She understands that both of those are tools to an end. We're in DC. We all know it. Right? Tools to the end. And the end desire is to be socially central. Peer approval is rewarding. Now, peer approval, there seem to be some gender differences in how this relates to academics and longitudinal data. But while we're on it, I want to just, because I'm a professional contrarian, let you know that peer pressure is not all bad. We all think of it in terms of drugs and alcohol and sex. Oh, peer pressure. If one of you walked up to a 12-year-old and said, don't do drugs, would it matter? Do you think they'd really listen to you? Okay, they might listen to you, but would it really change their behavior? I'm going to give you some rough news. I don't think so. But peer pressure isn't just narrowed to those vices that we're all worried about. Joe Allen's looked and he found that peer pressure is also when the 2 guys finish gym practice and back in class and they sit next to each other and another goes, shower much? That's peer pressure. And that kid's going to shower from now on. Peer pressure is saying, hey, how many colleges are you applying to? I'm applying to 5. 7. I'll get back to you on which those are. Peer pressure is, oh, hey, let's go and try out for the varsity team. I heard there's some really cool guys there. We'll have some fun. Peer pressure is not always just those negative things. And Alan's research, he's tracked middle school kids and had them come back to the lab year after year. They bring in their friends, they bring in their romantic partners until they're adults. And he's found that those kids who were truly immune to peer pressure, on average, their GPAs were a full point lower. Not 0.11. Most of the kids who were really immune from peer pressure were poor B- students. Because not only did they not care what their peers think, they didn't care what you think, they didn't care what their teachers thought, they didn't really care about anybody. They were so disaffected that they just really weren't motivated for anything. But the kids who actually cared about what other people, what their peers thought, were trying to make it and go forward. Another thing that I want to mention. Out of time, but I'll do it anyway. Are we okay? Oh, do we have questions? Should we do questions now? All right. So maybe we'll get to that in questions. But I want you to see that praise, sleep, aggression, these are all things that we heard one little piece of, right? We heard about aggression and bullying on the rise. But we didn't talk about why that happened. And most anti-bullying programs actually backfire. They make the situation worse. Why? Because most traditional bullying programs is, has someone in the room been bullied? Will you raise your hand and tell us about your experience? Oh yeah, see, the boys over there, they picked on me because I have glasses and I'm black, and that really hurt my feelings. Note to self, pick on boy who's black and wears glasses. It improved their ability to bully and to aggress. 75% of bullying incidents are bias related. And maybe if we call them bullying, we're just missing the boat entirely. So it's those pieces of research that we all care about so much because we care about our kids so much that we run with. School class size, praise, self-esteem, bullying, but they can backfire on us if we take them out of this context of the science. So I'm so thrilled that you guys joined me today so I could give you a little more of the story. Thank you so much. So Jeffrey is going to have a mic if you have questions.
Thank you for your book. It was really great to read it. One thing I was struck by in your sleeping comment was the connection that many of us find between exercise and the quality of sleep. And that, for example, both Elliot and I were athletes, and when we were kids, those of us who trained in the early morning, you know, if you got to school, for example, at 7 a.m. and had your training session then, you certainly weren't staying up late that night or any night. You slept deep and you slept incredibly well. Most of the obesity things that I think we hear about quality of sleep are the fact that kids are also not sleeping deeply, and that you could send your kids to bed at 10 all you want. If they're not tired, they're not going to sleep, even if they're sitting in their bed for the next 3 or 4 hours with their BlackBerry underneath or whatever. So if you could talk a little bit, and I don't think you did much on the book, about the relationship between the depth of sleep, not just sleep.
Well, exercise and sleep in terms of kids, the jury is still out on that. There's still research. There's research on adults that seems to indicate that exercise affects sleep, but we don't really know exactly how this responds for kids. And what we do know is that there seems to be sort of a cap on how much activity kids can do in any given day. So we all have this idea that if we increase PE, they'll do PE and they'll play after school soccer. Well, that's not true. At a certain point, they get tired. So if you increase PE, or extracurricular activities and sports afterwards, you may see lower physical activity during the day. So that's another reason why that jury is still out. But in terms of the quality of sleep, there's lots of research that shows this. And some of it is definitely technology. Japanese researchers had adults. We can't give sleep deprivation experiments to kids, really. We can do sleep shortening, tiny bits, but sleep deprivation is considered torture. And who in your right mind is going to hand over your kid to a researcher and say, here, deprive my child of sleep? Yeah, it just doesn't work. $10 for the person who found the secret political message in that comment. That's available only in the room, not online. But so they had Japanese researchers watch televisions, found that a single point of light on a television screen delayed melatonin production, the hormone needed for sleep, an hour and a half to 2 hours. Most kids have televisions in their rooms now. Most kids are watching television up until the minute they go to bed. 34% of kids fall asleep with music. Well, music delays melatonin production a half an hour. Oops. So I think we're doing a lot that actually is shortening sleep. And again, we can only see what adults are doing and extrapolate. But adults who are not able to go to slow wave sleep, which is sort of the deepest level of sleep, in the University of Chicago, they're doing experiments where they don't let them do that. They don't wake them up, but when they see that they're about to go into it, they'll do something like, and that's enough to prevent them from going into that next stage of sleep. And that's the metabolic equivalent of a 20 to 30 pound weight gain. And kids actually are learning declarative memory, especially in slow wave sleep. So it may also be affecting their learning. So there's certainly that effect. And some of the ongoing research right now shows that some of these early sleep shortening and early sleep problems, like snoring, predicts marijuana, delinquency, alcohol use, and age of sexual orientation at 14. I mean, they're not huge correlations, but it's amazing to think a 3-year-old's snoring problems predicts bullying in 8th grade, but it does. Yes? Right. It could be either that they're never actually getting into a deep enough level of sleep that, all of the brain's doing the job it could be, or it could be that it's just actually constant microsleeps, just constant waking up, and they're not actually sure which of those two it is. Well, think about the toddler who missed their nap. Now think about it permanently. Suddenly it makes sense, right? Right? Jeff? Yes.
Hi, I'm Harriet Stonehill. I direct the Mega Skill Education Center right here in Washington, D.C. And our program works with all resources that are available for a child's success. Parents, schools, communities, teachers, and all those resources need to come into play for a child to understand that playing on the computer at night, turn it off. So you can teach attitudes, behaviors of motivation, caring, responsibility, focus. We need to teach children and adults, all of us, how to focus and responsibility for our learning. I do want to say one thing. I also teach at the University of the District of Columbia, and I asked my students, if you knew you couldn't fail, what major would you have? And none of them picked the major they were involved in.
Wow, I'm gonna have to retell that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's
breaks
sort
my
of
heart.
sad, right?
Yeah, it breaks my heart.
But they're being pragmatic. That being an accountant will get them a job. Sort of being a rock star won't. The music major. So that's the realities of their lives. But it is a shame that passion has gone out of our thinking these days and what we choose to do.
I loved the book. Thank you for your hard work in writing it.
She phrased it so well. Did you notice that? Thanks. I love it.
Of all the things that you discovered in writing it, what was the most practical for you to take back home?
Well, that's like asking me who's my favorite baby.
What is your favorite baby?
Well, it was easy until a week ago because I had a niece, but now I have two nieces, so now I can't answer that one either. I think for me working with kids, I sort of can't walked away with this sort of Uber tip, which is be honest. Because I think a lot of praise and a lot of, oh, you're terrific, and a lot of rewards aren't about being honest. They're really about manipulation. You know, when a teacher or a mom or a caregiver says, oh, Johnny's paying such a good attention and he's quiet and he's ready for work. I wish everyone was like Johnny. It's not about praising Johnny. It's about shaming everybody else in the room. They hate Johnny and Johnny hates you. So I think that, you know, that really challenged my understanding. And what I realized was when I had wanted to start tutoring that I had thought I wanted to be a cheerleader. You're great! Woo! And what I've realized now is I want kids to trust me. And that same kid who I'm lying to and saying, oh my God, you're so amazing, that's the best drawing ever when he's 5, is going to remember that kind of thing when he's 15 and he wants someone that he needs to have help with. And we're so overpraising kids that kids after 7 don't take praise at face value. And by 12, they actually start thinking you're worried about them. Because it's the praised kid they're right. The praised kid is the one, oh, honey, that's great, keep going. The kid who's doing spectacularly, you leave alone. And the kids are onto us. So that I learned from them. The sleep chapter definitely had an effect on my life. In a former life, I worked in politics, and sleep when you're dead was my mantra. Having 17 of 20 of the world's sleep experts say, and you know, we'll get it on the other end, made me sort of stop saying that. But each of the chapters, in each of the things I researched, you know, about kids and race, kids and aggression, were things that I walked away going, if I had known, things would be different. Things would be different for me working with kids. Things would be different in my own life. So it's hard for me to say there's one particular thing, because then I feel like my 8 or 9 other kids have been neglected.
I had a question for you. There's been studies done sort of in the executive management world and business schools that suggest that it's more effective to recognize people's skills and have them emphasize the things they are good at and not try to ask them to become so broadly accomplished across other disciplines. And one book that I read really took this back into the education system and said we're making a huge mistake by trying to have kids equally master all of these subjects, that we would do much better if we recognize the things they are good at and help them emphasize those, because it's competitive differentiation in life, not being sufficiently mediocre at enough things, that really is what it's all about. And obviously this was written in a business context and it's very different, but I'm just curious what you think about that in light of the idea of motivation, because on the one hand, you know, you do want people to be motivated, and that dopamine triggers when you're doing something you actually do have great skills at, and you're being able to increasingly focus on that rather than going, you just got to learn math or you don't graduate, even though you're never going to be an accountant, right?
I think I'm going to surprise you. I hate that idea. Hate it. I think that we can make any activity fun, and you can make any activity drudgery, right? I mean, and you know that from business, right? I think that we need to figure out how to get kids engaged. And get kids engaged may be just making sure that they have time for recess so that they come back not tired. It may be about, you know, getting them enough sleep in class. But that's all fine for the business context because they've already learned and they've got their focus. But when you're 8 or when you're 5 or when you're 14 and you're being asked to specialize, you may never actually even be exposed to something that you're really good at, right? And you know, Howard Gardner's work with multiple intelligence is really there's schools devoted to multiple intelligence. And you can watch videos of documentaries of kids at these schools. And I'm not in favor at all. The neurologists say there's no neurological support for this. I mean, it may be an idea in terms of what kids are specializing in, but the result, which I don't think Howard ever intended, I don't know, I haven't asked him about it, but you have 5-year-olds saying, I'm not book smart, I'm body smart. 8-year-olds going, no, I'm science smart, but I'm not art smart or body smart. They pit, these labels are incredibly powerful. And if we keep encouraging them, then I think kids are really easy to lock in on only that thing that they're good at. And they're too young. Their brains aren't done yet, right? I mean, for many years, people have looked for intelligence in the brain and they couldn't find it. Ah, irony, right? You can find everything else in the brain except for intelligence. Well, it's because intelligence isn't located in the prefrontal cortex. Intelligence is located in the white matter connections between the prefrontal cortex and the parietal lobe, from the way your brain's different parts work together. And that takes years to develop. It's still going on for us right now. So the earlier we cut off with that, and the earlier we, I think we need to make learning fun, absolutely. But I think that pigeonholing kids and letting them specialize earlier and earlier is a big mistake.
How do you suggest teaching children about their inherent value and worth without either overpraising them and telling them they're smart, or even praising them for working hard, which I think can lead to a performance-based mentality where they have to work and work and work? Do you have any thoughts on how
I'm not convinced that we need to teach kids about their inherent worth. Roy Baumeister's work shows that self-esteem does not lead to more achievement, right? Carol Dweck's work shows that inherent self-esteem and perspective doesn't lead to working hard or learning something new. It leads to an increased willingness to cheat. Achievement teaches kids. They get self-esteem from achievement, but they don't get achievement from self-esteem. It's a one-way street. The way kids know about themselves is when they do something and they do it well. I was really worried when I stopped praising my kids and saying, "Oh, honey, you're so smart." I thought I'd have this adorable little 5-year-old go, "Ashley," that's what they call me, "Ashley, teacher said you used to say I was smart and you don't anymore. Do you not think I'm smart?" At which point I would find the nearest dagger and run it through my own heart, because I don't want to hurt these kids. But now I say, "Wow, honey, you worked really hard on that report, didn't you?" They look at me and go, "Yeah, I did." It's about developing. No, it's about them doing it well and knowing on their own that they did it well. Without that artificial, then what did you learn from it? It's the artificial manipulating isn't working. And what we need to do is teach kids to look at a paper and say, that's a good paper. Or, I really didn't do so well on that paper. Because it turns out that's the real difference between a kid who does well in school and a kid who doesn't. An A student can walk out of a final and say, "I bombed that." It doesn't mean they get A's every time. It's that they knew in advance they bombed or they aced. The kid who struggles walks out of that exam and says, you say, "How did you do?" "I don't know." They could have gotten an A, they could have gotten an F, they could have gotten a C, but it's a genuine surprise to them. They just don't have an internal awareness of when they're succeeding. And if we manipulate that awareness by telling them you're succeeding when you're not, that only confuses the situation. What we want to do is have that kid go, I did really poorly on that test. I need to go find some tutoring to get me some help. So that's what I'm looking for. And I think it's not about never praising kids. It's praising from them for actual achievement and not constant, and encouraging them to more focused on what they are doing and separate that from an idea of who they are. Separate. They're separate. My bad. That's Jeff's job.
Stephen Balcom with the Family Online Safety Institute. The Kaiser Family Foundation recently came out with a report that showed staggeringly that kids are now consuming, through multitasking, 11 hours of media per day. What do you make of the rush to get broadband into every classroom and even to incorporate the technologies that the kids are bringing to school? And there's a huge fight going on about that. Where are you at with all that?
It scares me.
Yes?
I was going to say more. It scares me. I think that there's very little proof of efficacy of any of these programs. In fact, the early data actually showed that none of the computer programs were effective at all. There was a new study that came out last week about how just giving kids video games dropped the amount of studying they did instantly. Some of you guys may have seen the Washington Post article in the past couple of days about banning laptops from law school, and everyone like prying it from your cold dead hand. I don't think there's any evidence yet that's solid enough to support this going on. I mean, I think that, you know, the internet's a fantastic resource for learning new information. So getting that information so that your out-of-date textbook isn't quite so out of date sounds fantastic. But is the answer to then give every kid a laptop from day one? I'm not convinced about this. I think there needs to be a lot of work, and that it's probably going to be very context specific. There are going to be certain subjects that it's great for, and certain subjects where there's either no effect or a negative effect. I also think that there's, you know, issues in terms of those social interactions, because as we all know from personal, but there's empirical evidence behind it, you know, kids will change their response via the internet as they would on paper. She's been desperate. Get her.
Thank you. I haven't read your book yet, but I wanted to ask, how does your research inform two different topics? One, disciplining children. I have a 3-year-old that doesn't nap sometimes. That's rough. And then also talking to children about race.
Well, let's see. We only have 5 more hours. The research about discipline is incredibly complicated, but here's the one thing I want to say that's the most important. Okay, first, no scholar supports corporal punishment. So if anybody says that I said they didn't, there's a lie. No scholar supports corporal punishment. Even those who actually have found there may not be a negative effect to it still don't support it. But what we find is that the key is not about the method of discipline. It's about the consistency and its use. Now again, I'm not saying it's good, but researchers are seeming to find that a hysterical screaming, "Oh my God, you're the worst kid ever," not that anybody do this, but "I can't believe you did that, I told you a million times," that out of control screaming may be way more damaging than a calm, "I told you I would give you a smack. If you broke that and you broke it, you come over here and I'll give you a smack." Doesn't mean the smack is good. It just means that the intent and the consistency, the losing control, parents losing control is incredibly traumatic for kids. It's learning that, you know, their parents are looking for you for emotional control. They're learning how to regulate emotion by looking at you. Parent-parent interaction is more predictive of a kid's emotional well-being than parent-child interaction. That's how important it is that their parents are on an even keel. And Nancy Darling is this brilliant researcher, and she said, you know, well, one thing, don't freak out. She's like, her Uber tip for parents was, don't freak out. But what she kind of explained more was, you know, it's really easy to set a million rules. It's really hard to enforce even one of them. So it's about setting a couple rules that are really important to you and explaining to the kid why they're important. Now, for a 3-year-old, explaining is kind of hard. I understand that. So for your child, it's more about, you know, consistency, that they understand that they can't do that. You know, when you're talking about your middle schooler and high school student, again, it's still sort of the same thing. But they may say, you know, this rule's not working for me this week, Mom. I understand I have a curfew, but there's a 10:30 event at, you know, a school event at 10:30, and it's late, and, you know, and all my friends are going, and it's really important to me, and blah, 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 blah. Then it's okay to say, you know, we'll give you a buy on it this time. That doesn't make you seem weak. That actually shows that you're a reasonable human being, and it's worth continuing a dialogue. Because as kids get older, arguing is actually, arguably, a good sign. Because that means they can't have to keep talking to you about what's going on in their lives. It would be way easier to say, "Okay, Mom," and then go out the window. So it's more about consistency and attitudes and being calm and fair than it is about a specific rule or a specific method of discipline. Should I go for race? She asked about race.
Let's finish up on that one.
Race?
On race, yeah.
Okay. Whew. Race, there's sort of two strains, but I'm going to start with the majority white perspective. Because it sounds, at least in theory, I don't know, maybe this is because I'm white, I admit it, but it just sounds nice. Which is, we don't need to talk to kids about race, because if we talk to kids about race, we will teach them it's important. But race isn't important. And what we should do is just raise them in a diverse environment, and they will just sort of get that we're all here and we're all together. So white parents, do talk about race, but if they talk about it, it's everybody's equal. God loves us all. Well, if you're 3, does that relate to race in any sense? Your age, is that about race? It's too vague. Kids don't understand this. You're speaking in code, and they want specifics. When you don't talk about race, you leave it for kids to figure out what it means on their own. And that's what they're doing. It's not that they don't see it. Kids actually start perceiving racial differences somewhere between 3 and 6 months. Now, obviously, they don't understand a socioeconomic or cultural difference along with that, but they see the difference. They are not physically colorblind. The same 3 or 4-year-old who can tell me this is brown can tell me what this color is, what this color is, and what this color is. And kids who are not told about race, don't talk about race, start looking for the most visible cue, and then they extrapolate. The adorable little girl with cornrows or blonde curls walks into preschool and looks for the girl who looks the most like her. Because the girl who looks the most like her likes the same toys I do and the same pizza. And that weird girl over there who doesn't look anything like me, she doesn't like the same pizza, she doesn't like the same toys. So we need to talk to kids in the same way we talk to them about gender. I don't think anybody in this room would have any trouble saying, boys and girls can both play soccer and be doctors and lawyers and firefighters and cooks and whatever they want to be. They can all be our friends. You can say the same thing about race, about language, about socioeconomic background. Black and white and brown and yellow and red people can all be our friends. They can all play soccer. That's all you got to do. Not that hard. And that's probably better for a 3-year-old, because none of the rest of it's probably going to go over their head. What's interesting is that the minority perspective, there's some people in the room going, white people don't talk about race? Yes, white people don't talk about race. When they did a study in the Journal of Marriage and Family, they did a survey, they found that overall 75% of parents had never talked to kindergartners about race. But when they did a racial background, they realized only 45% of white parents had, and almost every minority did. And it's because the minorities prepare their kids for bias. They feel at some point this is going to happen. Now, that's a legitimate concern. April Harrow, a researcher in North Carolina, asked 8th grade black boys if they had been discriminated against within the past 3 months, and almost all of them said yes. It's not that discrimination doesn't happen, but constant preparation for bias gets kids more susceptible and more likely to look for it in even neutral contexts. The other side of preparation for bias, and the minority message that is great for kids, which is a message everybody should be learning, is about ethnic pride, history. Black History Month is great for kids. It's sort of going back to Carol Dweck. The idea that this is how someone came before you and this is how they succeeded. And you can succeed too. It's not about you're innately good or you're innately bad. It's about what they did. And that is terrific for kids. And it's really important, I think, to have these dialogues early. When I asked Harris Britt, I'm like, well, when should we start talking to kids about race? I thought she was going to say 3 or 4. And she said, well, when do you start reading picture books to your kids? I'm like, 6 months? She's like, yeah, that works. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, when you have a picture book, you open it up. Oh, look at the balloon. The balloon is red. Oh, look at the giraffe. The giraffe is yellow. The boy's shirt is blue. The other boy's shirt is yellow. The only colors you didn't identify on the page were the skin colors of the kids. It's not that the kids understood anything except for one important thing. don't talk about race. That's all they learned is we can see it, but that's the one thing we're not allowed to talk about. And it's not about not talking about it. We would rather tell our kids about understanding race and ethnic differences or any kind of differences rather than figure it out on their own or on the playground, those 299 peer interactions on the day. But we give them this message that it's just too verboten and to leave it to figure them out on their own. So that's just a tidbit of race, but I want you guys to think about it the next time you read about the UC controversies and everyone's saying, it's the most diverse campuses ever. How could the UC schools be having racial tension? It's because they're not allowed to talk about it until they do something so inappropriate that they have a campus day where they're all supposed to wear armbands. These conversations, I think, really can, and I'm thrilled to be here and honored to be here because I really do think that in this way we're changing kids' lives. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley, for a fascinating discussion. As we see, it's a wealth, really, of ideas. So please, she'll be here to continue the conversation, have a book. And I'll remind you that this video will be on our website shortly thereafter. And there's a wealth of just multimedia that our web team has put on our website. So take a look at all of that. Thank you. Yep.